Welcome to episode 16 of the SumerSports Show. I'm one of your hosts, Eric Eager, and I'm joined by Thomas Dimitroff. Thomas, we're kind of clear of Christmas now. We're close to New Year here. When we talked today, you were on your way to to go to a bike ride. I was on my way in a balmy Minnesota day to the gym. I feel like we're sort of in full holiday mode, despite the fact that we're all back to work, Thomas. How's the week been so far for you?
Good week. A lot going on, interestingly enough, between, everything. When you think you're off a little bit, there's always something, right? And to your point, down here in Atlanta, it was 58 degrees, which was, again, balmy. I think you were in 36-degree balmy weather, right? Something like that?
Exactly. It's insane because when I went to the Vikings game on Saturday, I had, Quasey's assistant kind of came and picked me up and, we went down on the field, but like, there was like that intermediate time between like, hey, I'm here and them getting there, where it was like -10 and like myself and my friends, like our hands were freezing off. And now at least like you can go outside. Like I'm, Minnesotan enough, I guess, still where like if the weather is like 30 degrees but no wind, I can handle it. But when it gets sort of in that like 10 degrees with wind, that's really where I can have some problems.
So I have a quick question. You always ask me the questions. My question to you on the personal side, what was your best Christmas gift you got this year?
Good question. It's sort of weird. Like I don't do a ton of gifts. Like I obviously give my kids gifts but my sister-in-law, she got me in gift exchange and she got me a really good like coffee set. So like a mug that was really cool, like an organic coffee I've never had before. So I really like that. That was really fun. Obviously, the Vikings ticket that I got from one of my best friends was obviously really cool. So, what about you?
It's a perfect segue. That's why I asked you. So I get one of my most unique gifts I've ever gotten in my entire career. Check this out. This was from Les Snead. It's obviously a giant version of their ring. He sent me a wonderful note. And, we worked together at Atlanta, remember, and he worked in our group and he was my personnel director and in charge of a lot of things, he and Dave Caldwell. But check that out.
That's amazing. That's like the size of your hand.
Yeah. It's a really unique gift when you think about it. I know right now they're having fun giving this out, but it's a really, really cool gift. I haven't had too many of these fun gifts in the past, nor do I care about them. But because it's so unique, I don't mind putting it on my shelf.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it was funny. Like last year when the Chiefs faced the Bengals, when they've come here a few years in a row, like I always make it a tradition to take Brant, one of my good friends, the director of football admin for the Chiefs, and like I took him out to dinner. And I showed him around the PFF offices back when I was working there. And he goes, well, this is pretty cool, but let me show you something. And he showed me their 2019 Super Bowl ring. And so there's a couple pictures of me and my phone holding it. And like, it's pretty cool. And like, obviously for you, it's got to feel great because, that's a person on your tree, so to speak. And you have, a Super Bowl. You have a couple rings yourself, but, that's cool to see somebody have, success too. I have, there's, part of me is rooting a little bit for the Eagles. A great deal of me actually is rooting for the Eagles. One of my interns at PFF, Zach Drapkin, is now a quant analyst for Alec Halaby there. And so like, I sort of been wondering like, when does my tree get their first ring? That there's a decent chance here with how good the Eagles are this season. But that's cool. That last and to a point, like that ring kind of represents the size of the risks that Les has taken, right, in order to get to the Super Bowl. It was not a meek path. He certainly was bold and ended up winning a Super Bowl when many people, myself included, didn't necessarily know if those trades were really going to get them to the door.
I agree, Eric. And look, I want to edify the listeners here a little bit. Everyone here, when you get rings, Super Bowl rings, right? It's nice to get them when you're a personnel director and you're one of the middle management, right? I had 2 middle management. I call them middle management Super Bowl rings. At New England, and I was very proud of them. We got into the 16 Super Bowl, of course, in Atlanta, and unfortunately pissed down our leg. And it's unfortunate at levels for the rest of our lives. We got a beautiful ring from Arthur Blank just like we did before I took the job in Atlanta back in 08. Remember the David Tyree catch, one of the best. You thought we were going to win the Super Bowl, even though I left 3 games before. We got a beautiful ring. They're the most wearable rings, what we call, I hate to say this, we call them the loser rings in the NFL circles. We all do. We put them on our shelf and we never wear our AFC or NFC championship rings. And it's unfortunate because a lot of hard work has gone in. But just so everyone knows, that's kind of a little, tongue-in-cheek element that we add in the NFL to our Super Bowl rings and championship rings.
Well, what I think is so cool, and like obviously you exude this a lot on this show, and even before you and I worked together professionally, you certainly had this. But like what I think is cool about football is obviously there's the team part of the game, and even to the point where like when I was a senior, well, I was actually a redshirt junior, but I knew I was going to graduate and go to grad school, and I had my assistantship and my fellowship all put in place. But I still played out the season because I was like, I'm the only tight end worth a shit on this team, and all these guys have worked so hard, and the running backs need to get their yards, and the quarterbacks need to get their touchdowns, and so I gotta even though it's not necessarily my thing as much anymore, I gotta play this out because I'm a part of a team. And then, for you, it's, you're that way where it's like you've had your day in the sun. You continue to here at Sumer, but then, one of your friends, Les Snead, goes ahead, has his day in the sun. And you really do genuinely enjoy that. And what I think is great is because, throughout your time in football, you have so much sweat equity that is built up. And when you see your friends have success, it just has, there's a genuine, look on the face of excitement for that person. And that's really cool. So, that's awesome. That's a great gift. And it makes me want to become a gift guy again, because I got my daughters, I got my one, an Xbox. I got my other daughter, the Corgi, as you saw, the short-legged dog. And my wife got her a new phone and an Apple Watch and things like that. And, and then for me, it's kind of like, well, I'm like in a stage of my life where I kind of own everything I want to own. So like, I don't have really that desire, but every time I see a Super Bowl ring, I get a little bit jealous for the people that have it. So, yeah. So speaking of Super Bowl rings, Thomas, because I want to talk about a team that is competing for one right now. And this is going to be the segment, 3 Things Eric Thinks. The Kansas City Chiefs, a team near and dear to my heart, a team that, won a Super Bowl back in 2019. Played in the Super Bowl in 2020, has hosted the AFC Championship game 3 consecutive years, despite a roster that I think both of us will admit has its own flaws and things like that. They're getting they really have, I think, 2 positions right now, premium positions that are going to require some significant, I'm going to close the door here, significant investments, right? Left tackle, right? Right now they have Orlando Brown at left tackle, was a guy they traded a draft pick for. They applied the franchise tag. He wanted top billing money. The Chiefs said, no way, you're not that kind of player. He's played an okay season this year. They're going to probably have to move on from him. And defensive end, right? Like edge for them. Both of those positions, as we talked about edge specifically on, episode, I believe 12 or 11 or 12 of the SumerSports show, we talked about evaluating edge and how to get that really good player, you either have to get lucky or you have to get a guy in the top 10 of the draft. And left tackle, it's sort of the same thing, right? Like after the first 10 or so picks this year, we saw Ike Ekwonu, Charles Cross, and Evan Neal taken in the top 10. After that sort of top 10, then you're dealing with guys who are flawed and can't necessarily play right away. Trevor Penning, for example, of New Orleans, Tyler Smith, who we're going to talk about with Dallas. Like it's a crapshoot after that. So the Chiefs have 2 big needs, right? Left tackle and defensive end. It's almost impossible to access those players in free agency, right? It's almost impossible to go after them. And when you do, the guys like Trent Williams are going to cost a lot of money. And so you kind of have to use the assets that you have to your advantage. And Chris Jones, who's 28 years old, a defensive tackle who's had a very, very good career, a wonderful career out of Mississippi State, picked 37th by John Dorsey in 2016. He has the highest, defensive tackle grade among PFF players so far this year. Aaron Donald's been hurt. He's basically on the last year of his contract effectively. The Chiefs, own his rights, but they're not going to be able to work with the money that they currently have with him on contract. The Chiefs probably need to trade Chris Jones if they're going to effectively address left tackle and edge. What does that, when I say things like that, what does that make you think of?
That's a really good thought, Eric. I mean, when I think about that, I think you as a general manager and a head coach often look at situations like this and you beat your head against the wall and you go up and down the line of your roster deciding on the legitimate ones, would we trade or do we need to keep, for not only because of the person's skills, but because of his leadership ability, because of, God forbid we talk about this, because of how they market the club, right? Because believe me, there's a business element to it as well. Make no mistake about it. Arthur Blank was very mindful of me, though he let me do my thing. He would always knock on my door and let me know the importance of how many jerseys, figuratively and literally, are sold here, right? So this becomes a big conversation. I want to talk more back and forth on this, Eric, because I love your thought on it. And I sit there and I think about what I said. I don't know, I might even said it a couple of days ago or whenever we did, when we were talking about interior D linemen. I think you can get good defensive linemen, a la Grady Jarrett and many, many, many more, of course, that can play inside for you, but you can't, to your point, go after, oftentimes not get that premier rush guy unless you're either drafting, of course, very high. They don't come available in the market. The only way they come available in the market if the guy is a true a-hole. Let's call the way it is, right? That is the only way, to your point. So I want to talk more about this because I look at it and I think, all right, you're going to get a pass rusher that's going to influence the game in so many ways. Not that your interior D lineman isn't, but as I mentioned before, there's an opportunity that interior defensive lineman gets 30 to 45% play time, if that, where you're getting that guy in today's world, the way it is with sub D and such, that cat's going up around the corner all the time. And if you're looking to be a perennial championship team, you need to have that. We obviously struggled with that after Vic Beasley lost his wind. We never got it back. There's been many cases that, I want to throw it back to you quickly, but there have been so many mistakes on the rush side because there is such a want and need for it. And all of us will tell you in the league, we make most of our mistakes on overly excessive needs.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. Like one of the, I thank you. Like I think that the hard part is, and the Chiefs have gotten, so George Karlaftis is the defensive end out of Purdue who they took in the very late first round this year, and he's been okay, right? He has the second most pressures in the NFL among players at that in that class, behind Aiden Hutchinson, and his pressure rate's at like a 10%. That's okay. But like the problem is he's not the bona fide defensive end that you can build. He's not John Abraham, right? To talk in Falcons language. He's not, he's like, in some ways it's kind of funny because you guys, signed this guy. He's more of the Ray Edwards to Jared Allen, right? And to me, like that guy can be effective, but he needs that buck next to him, right? He needs the Derek Thomas type. He needs the real bender, the guy that can really make plays. And then you can get cleanup stuff. And the problem is that, as you said it perfectly, what creates mistakes is prior mistakes, right? So the Chiefs, when they tried to draft Teno Passigio out of Villanova, again, like a freak guy who was not that productive in college, and like they said, well, we can teach him how to rush the passer, and they couldn't, right? And then the next year they got Breland Speaks out of Ole Miss, and like he lasted one season with Kansas City, right? So those two errors compound, and again, where did they get him? Round 2 in both situations. But why do the Chiefs have to pick that guy in round 2? Because they're good enough every year where they're never picking top 10. They're never picking top 8. They're never picking. And like that's a quandary that the Chiefs are going to be in as long as Patrick Mahomes is their quarterback.
It's great. I love it.
Go ahead.
No, let me interject quickly. You're talking about all this, and I'm thinking, and why do they get him in the second round? A ton of times, and the Chiefs have been there before. God bless them. They get them. Those guys drop out of the first round for character issues, or right on the verge, right, of what is right and what is wrong. And they get some damn good players over the years. The Cowboys do the same thing. So Randy Gregory's of the world. he was a second rounder, right? I'm not losing my mind there.
Yeah, well, and even Chris Jones had some character. Like if you look at the history of the Chiefs, Travis Kelce had problems at Cincinnati. Tyreek Hill, of course, had had a myriad of issues. Kareem Hunt had his problems, and they came back up in Kansas City. Like and Andy does a good job with those. Tano Passing is another example. He wasn't a turd or anything. He just was raw. But again, if you're taking a guy at a premium position in round 2, he's got problems. Now, they compounded this issue because in 19, when they traded D Ford to the 49ers because he didn't fit in that scheme. Ultimately, that was a great trade because Ford barely did anything after that. Justin Houston left, and I know the reason Justin Houston left. I'm not allowed to say it, but Justin Houston left. They went and traded 2 high draft picks and a $100 million contract for Frank Clark. To me, that is the desperation of a contender, right? Because you're never going to pick in the top 10 if you have a quarterback like Mahomes or prior to him, even Alex Smith combined with Andy Reid was never going to get you much closer to 15, right? So then you buy into a guy like Clark who had moments, right? But the reason he's available and the Seahawks didn't give him the mega deal is because there's a little bit of inconsistency to him. There's a little bit of whatever to him. And so you buy into him. And that trade, now they won a Super Bowl and flags fly forever. But the Frank Clark trade has, from a production standpoint, has not been a hit. And now, again, they have the same problem back over. And again, I just don't know what they can do without trading Chris Jones to a team. When the Colts traded DeForest Buckner to the Colts, they got the 13th overall pick, right? And they got the $20 million APY back in salary cap space. So that created them the freedom to be able to do a few things defensively. And I think that's the only out the Chiefs have in this case.
It's great. It's a great conversation. I think it's important. Let me piggyback off of your points just a little bit earlier as well. And then you fold back into where you want to go with this, because I love this conversation. For the listeners, and what we deal with as head coaches and GMs in this league, GMs and head coaches, of course, is, okay, you see really good football players, and you see some that have some wayward soul to them, others don't. There are myriad issues that you have to really hone in on to decide whether you want to, acquire that person and bring that person into your building. Let me just give Andy Reid massive kudos, besides the fact that he likes drawing mustaches on faces in commercials, which I love that commercial, by the way.
Yeah.
There are very few head coaches when they cross the line that they can do that. I've had this conversation before a little bit with you, but I don't think Mike Smith would care for me or bother with me or be agitated with me sharing this point. But I remember in those earlier years, as a head coach in this league, you come to the table usually as a coordinator, right? So he and Dan Quinn came as defensive coordinators, but he was around some pretty tough ass guys, right? And some wayward souls, some of those people that Smitty had in Baltimore, some of the people who he was around, as well as Jacksonville, there were some tough hombres there. Mike had a really good feel for that. And I remember when we were looking at certain players coming in, without getting off on a whole bunch of this, and I remember saying to Mike, please remember, it's easier for you as a D coordinator or a linebacker coach or a D line coach to deal with the riffraff and the personality, because you have a pretty small compartment.
You're like the grandparent, right?
That's exactly right. Now you're the dude. Now
you're the parent now.
You have, right. That's exactly right. Now you have so much on your plate, and it has so many levels that can bleed into your leadership as a head coach and bleed into your team and your camaraderie and everything it is. So it is a much more complicated spot to be in as a head coach. So back to Andy, massive kudos that he's able to navigate that line when he's as a head coach and as a longtime head coach, where you would think his personality and his patience would waver over the years. Man, it just keeps getting stronger.
Yeah, and I think that this is where it gets really. This is where the rubber hits the road for the Chiefs, and we have a very good question, and I just want to read it because it's very pertinent to the times. This is from a DM earlier, Chiefs fan and physician here. I'm a huge Chiefs fan, and I basically the question is from the listener is, can you convince me? Actually, I got a bunch of different Chiefs ones. Can you convince me that the changes we saw in Brett Veach this past year are real and not just accidentally analytically savvy? Is basically the question. This is from Joseph Hefner on Twitter. For example, Tyreek Hill traded, offered OBJ money, did not actually go through with it. Are we convinced? Because prior to this season, Brett Veach had shown a lot of it had a different tone to him, right? He had never traded back in the draft prior to 2022. He was aggressive in getting Frank Clark. He was aggressive in trading up for draft picks as well. And and to the point where like they even did something into the 2020 draft where they had a 7th round pick and they traded back into the draft. They used a future year pick that was a round ahead of the one that they wanted to get a cornerback named Bo Peep Keys, who didn't even make the team after year one. And it was just like one of those where like just so aggressively confident in his evaluations that he was doing those things. And that left the Chiefs with some difficulties, right? Because when you only have 5 or 6 draft picks a year, then those guys have to hit because you're essentially you're playing 2 blackjack hands for the result of 1. And whereas, obviously if you trade back, you're playing 2 blackjack hands for the results of 4 or 5 in that case. And so this offseason, we saw a market difference. We saw, trading Tyreek Hill and the $25 million cap hit he was going to have, not this year, but averaging over the years. They get 5 draft picks. He did trade up for Trent McDuffie in the first round with one of those picks, but he did trade back in round 2, which is the first time he ever traded back. The Orlando Brown wanted kind of the number 1 deal among left tackles in all of football. They relented on that. They played on the franchise tag with Brown. And another sneaky move that they made, or that they didn't make, that not that many people talk about, is they paid Patrick Mahomes' entire base salary. I can't remember which designation was, but they paid Patrick Mahomes' salary as was this year, as opposed to converting it and spreading it out over the years. So they took a big hit on Mahomes this year because they had the salary to do so, which means that Mahomes' cap hits in subsequent years are going to be smaller than they otherwise would. So they did a number of different things this year that were a market difference than what they had done in previous years. And the question here from Joseph on Twitter is that just random? Is that just Tyreek Hill being a one-off situation, or is that an actual fundamental change in how the Chiefs are operating? I do think time will tell, but I also think the Chris Jones situation is maybe another test in this regard, because as you talked about on the show, team building is about pillars, right? It's about pillars and then building around them. Now, the Chiefs have Mahomes, they have Kelsey, they traded a pillar in Hill, right? On the defensive side of the ball, you basically, Chris Jones is the pillar left over. So if you trade him, you are going to either have to hope that one of these draft picks comes up and plays really, really good football and becomes that pillar, or you have to replace him a different way, right? And through either draft or free agency. So I do think that my initial inclination is to say yes. I think that they genuinely changed the direction of how they go after winning Super Bowls. But I think Chris Jones is really the test here.
Wow, I have a lot to say about this. This is your team, so far be it from me to comment on your glorious Chiefs. As I've mentioned before, I like Brett a lot. My conversations with Brett in the past have been, Brett is very keen on learning and growing in that position. He knows that in the scope of it all, he's still fairly young. Is he in his 4th or 5th year this year as a GM?
So he started in July of 17.
Yeah. So, I mean, he's done wonderful things during that span. We had a conversation when I was making my way around the country doing this GM journey thing, and his conversation was very, very positive towards Andy, of course, right? Andy is his mentor. He's in a special situation where, kind of like Bill Belichick to a lot of the personnel guys that have come through, those are special spots to be in. Not only Andy Reid is wildly important to Brett, but so is Clark Hunt. He's got a massive amount of respect for him. And I can imagine in Brett's quest to grow, not only as a football man, but as a leader and as a business person within football, he's taking the unbelievable stuff that Andy offers him. He's taking really cool information that Brant Tillis is offering him, right? Your guy. Should I say that, your guy, or not?
Yeah, he's one of my best friends. Yeah.
One of your best friends. And then don't forget, as a younger GM, you often look to your owner and you sit down and have great conversations with your owner. And I guarantee, shouldn't say I guarantee, there's a high percentage of chance that he has sat down with the owner and they've talked about the growth of the organization, how they can grow beyond just being football myopically, talent driven to there's more to it. I wish that I had more and more of that and had more of what SumerSports is going to offer and what you would offer to me, because I think I would have a rounder view as a team builder. And my point is, I really do believe what I've called, the trifecta there. That's not even talking about, that's talking about the quarterback as well.
Yeah.
But I really do believe that they have a lot of really good people. By the way, their president there, why am I blanking? That's horrible, at the Chiefs.
Donovan?
Yes, Mark Donovan, obviously very smart guy, good football background, of course, as a player. I'm sure all of those people are feeding Brett Veach and helping him grow. That's my take on it.
Yeah, and I think the big thing to me is you've seen growth in like this sound like, again, I'm an outsider. I do follow the team very closely, both just as a fan, but also as an analyst as well. Like, you've seen over time a lot of the conflicts that you've talked about where the general manager will, like take, for example, Juan Thornhill, who was a second round pick by Brett Veach in 2019, tears his ACL at the end of the season, doesn't really get a ton of playing time in 2020 for Daniel Sorensen, a player who I think Steve Spagnuolo and Andy Reid really liked. And over time, you could sort of see some of those conflicts. Like, hey, we drafted Thornhill, he needs to be the player, versus we really like and are comfortable with Daniel Sorensen. Like, you've seen some of those conflicts now, not necessarily, and again, the Chiefs either win or lose together, but one by the Veach side, which is like, no, we're playing Thornhill, we're letting Sorensen go because he's the better player and we evaluated him as such. And I think that earlier in the tenure, to your point, right, when Veach is when they let go of John Dorsey and brought Veach in, there was certainly like a, hey, this is Andy's guy type of thing. And now I think that they're trending more towards equals, which again, then you're going to get some wins on that side of the ledger. And that's just one example that was very public last year, where a lot of people in Chiefs media weren't quite sure why Daniel Sorensen was playing over Juan Thornhill. It was very clear that Sorensen was a coach's decision and Thornhill was a front office decision. And eventually that one won out. And, the questions that I have again is like, now that Mahomes is where he is, right, a 10-year, $450 million deal, he's management too. And I think the Tyreek Hill thing was more of like a, hey, like, we brought Tyreek Hill. Like, Tyreek Hill was here to make you into a superstar, much the same way that Stephon Diggs was for Josh Allen. But eventually you are the car now, right? You're not just the driver. You're the whole car. Can you get by with Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Juju Smith-Schuster, Sky Moore, second-round pick, and, Pat's led the league in passing, so the proof is in the pudding. But, like, there's a part of that, too, where, like, all three members of leadership, all three members of management are collectively comfortable with this. Andy's comfortable calling the offense without Tyreek. Mahomes is comfortable executing it. And, Brett Veach is comfortable trading one of the team's favorite players for 5 draft picks, many of whom aren't going to be superstars from day one, for what was a superstar.
Yeah, that mix. I mean, there's a lot, as we know, there's just so much into making decisions. It's not cut and dry. And, in the end, remember, teams are not letting go of people that they really believe are going to help them win Super Bowls. And for some reason or not, on top of the money, of course, they're looking at it and they're saying, obviously the opportunity cost for us to make this move is it's ultimately, it can help us. And there's so much there. Let me just finish this conversation on Kansas City very quickly too, Eric, which I think a lot of people don't know this. Our league, the NFL, and my contemporaries in the league, we are they are very quirky. I love them. We're very quirky. The amount of jealousy out there regarding Brett Veach in those early years, that he struck gold with a quarterback the way he did, with a head coach the way he did, and an owner the way he did, again, trifecta. And then on top of that, doing what they're doing right now and continuing to do what they're doing, which is a really big thing. There's a lot of jealousy in the league, thinking, wow, I wasn't able to get that set up where I was. And I only lasted 2, 3, 4, 5 years on some of these general managers. And it's how the ball rolls, of course, right? And maybe it's a karma thing. Maybe B. Veach took care of business along the way. I mean, he's a good dude. By the way, he's into horse racing. He's been very outspoken about that. He said he doesn't pick horses well. He picks players much better than he does his horses.
Well, that's he would be my good friend Steve Kornacki from MSNBC is also kind of a closeted horse fan, and they finally let him talk about that on air. And I think he revealed that not only does he bet a lot on horses, but he's not very good at it. I actually don't know somebody other than Bill Benter, the billionaire who made a ton of money betting horses in Asia. I don't know of anybody who actually is good at betting horses, but I do know a lot of people who like betting horses. So Veach, not necessarily standing out there, but very, very, very interesting to know that. I did not know that. But like, here's a question that from Fraser Lamont, a very loyal listener, by the way. For those of you listening, we really appreciate. Please hit the subscribe button. When you subscribe to us on YouTube, you will get a notification of when we go live. Obviously, subscribe to us at SumerSports on Twitter. You can follow us there. A lot of cool graphics. Parker Fleming's been building some cool preview packets and stuff like that for us. And those make it on there. Fraser asks, Eric, what is the draft value you expect from Chris Jones in the offseason? My guess is, and again, this is part of my thesis here, I guess my thought is that Chris Jones would garner a pick between 20 and 32 in the draft. I don't know if he's quite good enough to get what Buckner got from the Colts, which is pick 13. But I think he could get a pick in the bottom half of the first round, for the Chiefs. You just remember too that you're not necessarily just trading a draft pick for a player. You're also committing the money to the player, and that is that's something that is important. When the Chiefs traded for Orlando Brown, they did not have to commit the contract to him, and so that draft that trade was a lot less expensive than it looked at like initially. When the Cleveland Browns traded a 5th round pick for Amari Cooper, they had to pay the $20 million to Amari Cooper, so it wasn't as cheap as the 5th round pick indicates. So a team that's going to trade for Jones not only has to trade the draft capital, but also has to sign and do an extension. And so again, that's where I would put it. Thomas, where would you put it?
Yeah, look, I like it. It's aggressive in the back half of that first. I'm thinking more second. I know that's a little edgy for you, Lamont, but I will say, look, I think to me, we in the NFL and they in the NFL are big historical people, right? They're going to go. So and Paul Jones, the founder and chairman of our company, has often said this, like, you don't want egg on your face in the morning, the next day after the draft, right? It's a big thing. Not only do you not want it in the media, not only in your fan base, but you surely don't want it when your owner's walking down the hall, rolling his eyes at you, so you have to be very mindful. The history of it all in the league is good for us. What we don't do, generally speaking, is tap into the Eric Eagers of the world and the Brant Tellises of the world and say, no, this is a back end of this first. Do not let it go for anything less than that. We get to a point where we're comfortable. We're looking at what's back out there and we go with it. We may be able to hold our water more with what you can offer as a data scientist and move forward. I know that I could have in that situation.
Yeah, I just think when you think about, the proverbs that we have, which is like, don't trade up for a non-quarterback and don't do X, Y, and Z. Like, I think you can stretch some of those out if it's a part of this product. So like, for example, I'm looking at the draft board here. My old friends at PFF, like when you're looking at Will Anderson out of Alabama, you're looking at Miles Murphy out of Clemson, Nolan Smith out of Georgia, Tyree Wilson out of Texas Tech. Those are all guys who, in the PFF board at least, which does a pretty good job, are top 10 players. You're not accessing those players if you're the Chiefs and you're hopefully picking 32, but picking somewhere between 26 and 32, like you're going to need your own pick and a pick you get from Chris Jones or just to move up and get that player. And again, like Chris Jones is probably the only way in which you can access those kind of players in the draft. And those are the only players that, let's be honest, can have that influence right away.
I have a Chief-related question then. This is right in line. Okay, how many Pro Bowls has Chris in his quiver?
I think he's at least 5, right?
Okay, all of you Chiefs fans, here it goes. You ready, Eric? All of you Chiefs fans, who in the scope of the history of the franchise is more valuable to your organization? Tony Gonzalez, who you traded to the Atlanta Falcons for a second rounder, or Chris Jones? I know there's a difference there. Remember, just so everyone knows this, when we did that deal with Tony Gonzalez for a second rounder, I remember calling Tony. I remember calling Doug Hendrickson, who was his pseudo agent. And I said, Doug, do not bust my ass on this. If I come away and Tony Gonzalez only hangs with us for 1 year, I am screwed. He obviously ends up staying 5 years and thrives. He should have won a Super Bowl, of course, but he didn't. That's a good question. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think Gonzalez played so it's interesting because Gonzalez was a different cat, right? Because, we're talking about Travis Kelce right now and how whether or not Travis is the best tight end in Chiefs history. And a lot of the discussion is, well, Tony played twice as long as Travis Kelce did, right? So you're talking about a specimen, a guy that came into Atlanta with some tread left on the tires, despite he almost had 2 Hall of Fame careers, one with you and one with Kansas City. And, the other nice thing about tight end is the value. So I'm getting back to like a TJ Hawkinson trade by Kwesi. Like tight ends their franchise tag number is cheap. If you get a plus receiver at tight end, I'll trade for those guys all day because the salary that he's going to cost is not that high. So a second for him was probably fair because the price tag coming in. So yeah, you're probably right. Chris probably is a second, which I think would anger a lot of Chiefs fans and would probably make Chiefs fans say, well, if we're only going to get a second for him, why don't we just, because most Chiefs fans were angry that the Tyreek Hill trade only netted them like the 30th pick in the draft or something like that. Like they were pretty, unimpressed with that, even though it came in as 5 draft picks and the value of it was immense. Most people want to see a top 10 pick if they're trading a pillar of the franchise. So that is a really a good question. And Tony was kind of a unicorn at the time, which was interesting. Yeah, crazy you guys got him for that, but yeah, good question there.
As we talked, Eric, the beginning of the week, what's one team's food is another team's poison. Yeah, I've gone beyond the idea of guessing how, where as long as it's within reason, if that's 22, 24 or, 36, 37 or 33, it's in the same area, right? Look, you all may think that's crazy. There have been times, even in my times in Atlanta, when we drafted Matt Ryan first, we come hell or high water, we're going to get a left tackle. We should have drafted Sam Baker in that 5 or 6 or 7 into the second round, but our butts moved up aggressively. I was going to have a left tackle there, even if he was only good, meaning he was good. He was a 6 for us, not a 9. And it was important to us, right? So I guess what I'm saying is all of this comes down to it only takes one, right? It only takes one.
Well, and especially at those premium positions, right? Like once you get Von Miller into the mix, as your friend Les knows, like, that guy can win you a Super Bowl. And left tackle, similarly, one of the reasons the Rams are struggling this year is funny. Andrew Whitworth retires and Von Miller goes to Buffalo. Those are 2 premium position players that are no longer there. And again, with Kansas City, I think the reason that life is harder for them than it should be when you have the Hall of Famer like Mahomes is left tackle and edge are not, necessarily there in great supply. I'm going to go in a different direction because I know I had this in this order, but I know we're already 38 minutes in and we want to get to questions. You brought up something really interesting about time frame. And this gets me to this one game this weekend, the Eagles-Saints, right, where the Eagles are at home. They're facing a Saints team that is not eliminated yet, by the way, 6-9, I believe, is the record right now. They're a game out behind the Tampa Bay Bucks for the NFC South title. They were swept by the Bucks, so they need a lot of help to get there. But the Eagles are in a position where if they win, their draft pick that they got in a trade with the Saints actually moves up. It becomes better. So this is one of the weird situations where a team gets to win a game and increase their draft stock. But it does come from this fundamental thing about if you are this sort of winning begets winning, right? Howie Roseman has done a wonderful job with the Eagles. Not everything is hit, right? Jalen Reagor was a bad draft pick over Justin Jefferson. Not everything is hit, but he has the kind of cachet, the kind of long-standing tenure with the team, very similar to what you had in Atlanta, where he can start to do some things where he can take advantage of some desperation on the part of their opponents. Now, the Saints have had a ton of success, as you know, that you've made, playoffs a number of years in a row. Last year, they had a winning record without Drew Brees. They lose Sean Payton. They're in a terrible cap situation, right? So they need to get young, cheap talent into the building as quick as possible. Last year, the Eagles, because they traded pick 6 to the Dolphins for pick 12, got a first-round pick, right? Then they also had a first-round pick by virtue of a different trade. So last year, they had 3 first-round picks at one point in the draft. They also have a very good roster, not a ton of open positions on the roster. So instead of taking all 3 draft picks, they trade with the Saints to give the Saints a draft pick now so that they can have one in the future, right? And that pick ended up being like pick 16, I believe. I can't remember exactly, mid-first round. Now, the pick that they're going to get from the Saints is going to be a top 10 pick. There's research by Cade Massey, Richard Thaler, a Nobel Prize-winning economist, to talk about like NFL teams drastically undervalue future draft picks. Is there, this is something we're trying to do at Sumer. Is there an edge, like in obviously like, getting your feet wet as a GM, having some success, and then at what year do you start saying, look, I'm going to start trading current year assets for future year ones, because you're getting future year ones at pennies on the dollar?
Yeah, that was always a discussion of ours, how we really truly wanted to value the future picks. Nick Polk, our adept cap guy during that time, would always come to the table with discussion on that. So yes, I want to talk about that a little bit. Can I just backtrack for a second? You made mention of Howie Roseman. Think about this, everyone, not only the Philly fans, but the other listeners here who try to get their head around, where is Howie and what is Howie Roseman, the GM's situation there? Meaning, where does his adeptness come from? Remember, Howie Roseman's background was legal. He did some amazing things there as he grew through the building and grew to learn. Here's the interesting thing. Many people in the league who are by the trade evaluators would look back to what I mentioned earlier about Brett Veach. They would look to Howie and say, well, he's not an evaluator. He's not a football guy, just like they would with Mickey Loomis. Both of these gentlemen have done a hell of a job. Just to stay with Howie for a minute, Howie's background, though it was legal, had a great deal of interest to learn from some of the great people that have come through the Philly organization. I call them the Philadelphia Eagles organization. And you can talk to anyone in his building right now, and not just because they're in his building. Howie is a good evaluator for a guy who you would assume is more making sure that he's placing people around him. He's always had really good, make no mistake about it, always had really good evaluators and personnel men around him. And he still has a good eye and a very good eye, according to some. He's got guys like Dave Caldwell, and he's got guys like Matt Russell. In my mind, Dave was, the GM, as you know, at Jacksonville, and obviously didn't win games. There were unfortunate situations that we won't get into the former coach who came on board when things threw things off. And I'm not just sticking up for my guys. And Matt Russell, 2 of the best evaluators out there. I don't want to prolong this and protract this, Eric, but I'm getting to a point. Howie has no problem with his ego bringing in studs in the evaluation world. Matt Russell, one of the best evaluators, assistant GM at Denver with John Elway. These guys are in there along with the rest of the staff who provide him with a lot of really, really good information on top of his very strong statistical analysis group. To me, he is armored at all levels. And I think that is why he can go in there with such confidence and make the moves that he is making back to, here he is right now. He is making moves at, what year is he in, 13? He loves it that he's going by me. I was 12 and a half. I called it 13. You only give me 12. I think Howie's in his 12th or 13th right now.
By the way, there was a pitch deck that Thomas and I had before, and I said, Thomas was a 12-year NFL GM, and then I described myself as, one of the top people in football analytics.
No, not one. The top.
Yeah, Thomas took that as a slight, and I said, Thomas, a 12-year NFL GM is a feat far greater than what I had. But I think you hit on the, and I'm glad the game recognizes game here, because my thing with Roseman and the Eagles broadly is they allow people they allow their people to have success. It's one of the reasons, again, like one of my, I've actually had a few people who I know really well and respect greatly work for the Eagles. And one of the reasons I'm like very happy for them to go there is because I know that they won't be limited. Like you have Joe Douglas over in in New York. He was there. Andrew Barry, Emily. I can't remember. They've had a number of people come through that building. The Browns are similar, by the way, which I also like. Kwesi went there and then became a Vikings GM relatively quickly. Like they didn't squash on him very long, and like I really do appreciate those teams that bring people in to complement what they're doing. Alec Hallaby has been there, for 10 years or so. I think he's the first, if I recall correctly, the first analytics person to be an assistant GM in the NFL. Like there's just a lot of things I admire there because, again, like I just don't know how effective you can be as a general manager if you are kind of the one who's doing everything, right? You have to trust other people. And unfortunately, fortunately for the people involved, but also kind of what makes it hard is that when you empower great people, those people are going to get opportunities that are to leave you. So what is so impressive about Philadelphia is that they empower people to be a part of the process, to have real decision-making power, to have real influence over what's going on. Howie has enough humility, I guess, and enough confidence in himself to know that even if somebody might outshine them in the moment, it's the system, right? And then those people go on to do great things, and then they have to replace them, which again is not an easy thing. And so to me, I think that is a mark of, obviously great leadership. And so to me, I know, you recognizing that is very cool because it, sort of how I think as well. That is one thing with the Eagles that I think is great. But also what it gives you, I think, is a system where you're like, okay, we may lose Douglas, we may lose Barry, we may lose, so on and so forth. Taylor Rajak, the director of analytics in the Carolina, was once in Philly. Namita Namukakar, I always mispronounce her name. She was there. She went to the Seattle Kraken to help run analytics there. Like they're a system there, and ultimately what that allows them to do is make long-term moves that kind of take advantage in many ways of the teams that are a little bit strapped in the moment.
So let me start by saying there are very few in our league that would ever categorize Howie Roseman as having what was your line? He has humbleness, or what was
humility?
Humility. No one says Howie's a humility guy, and I love you, Howie, but that's not your shtick, man. He walks with the swagger coming out of his ears and on the backside of wherever it is. I mean, he is a swagger guy.
I taught his son at Wharton. His son was a very gracious kid.
Son is great. His son wants to be him, which I love. I'm not saying that as a negative. I'm saying you need it in this league. Howie walked off the field a few weeks ago. Did you see that?
Somebody wanted to give him shit for the Ragger trade, and he's like, I built this. We're 13-1, folks, like, or whatever the record was at the time.
Yeah, he threw an F-bomb at him, which I thought was amazing. He said he wasn't going to do it. I talked to him about it. He was walking over strongly, of course, in a really confident way. And he said, I gave you an effing Super Bowl, basically, is what he said. So my point there, in which I think is important for rising executives listening to this, and even owners, if we were getting owners in this, listening, you have to have confidence as a GM to hire people that can help you in your building. Even if you are the kick-ass evaluator that you think you are, and most GMs do, you have to make sure you surround yourself. And you have to surround yourself with confidence and know that there's security around that. This is not a back pat in any ways. At one time in Atlanta, we had 5 GMs in there, and I was skewered in the local media. Thomas is killing himself. What is he doing? We had Scott Pioli, we had Rustin Webster, we had Phil Emery, we had Chris Polian, and of course, Rich McKay was down the hallway. That's a lot of GMs with a lot of swagger in a building. That said, I think it's really important to take everything that those men know, and they can always add to a guy like Howie. Howie's open to doing that because he's so confident. If you get an insecure GM out there or a young GM who's tiptoeing around, you're not going to benefit from what I think can be beneficial when you're dealing with really good football people with experience.
Yeah. And there's always the risk there, of course, right? Like if you you know, if that person is angling for the general manager's job and all that kind of stuff. Like there again, like I think it's why I said it's a humility thing, but it's also a confidence part of it. What too, right? Because you have to be confident in yourself. And this is like, you know, one of the main reasons, like me, you know, like for example, like I mentor a lot of people in sports analytics, and I, you know, try to build people up, and I try to make this place a space where everybody can be. But a lot of that is like, I think people who don't are just not necessarily confident that if they gave other people an opportunity, that they would have one left. Right. And I think that, you know, so there's an aspect of, you know, humility, of course, and giving people opportunities and knowing that, you know, you're here in large part because people before you threw the ladder back down, throwing the ladder back down, but also having the confidence in yourself, knowing that if everybody had a chance, you would still also have one. And that I think is where a lot of people, you know, get nervous. But because there are situations where, you know, folks try to come after you a little bit when you give them an opportunity. So it's tough there. I can't say enough nice things about the Eagles. I even thought that Sunday when they put their backup quarterback in, a guy they acquired for a 6th round pick, he looked like a starter in the stead of Jalen Hurts. They obviously did not pull it out, but Dallas is one of the top teams in the league. I just watch them every week, and I'm just like, you go ahead, Thomas.
No. You're on the ball tonight. Can I cap it just from my perspective? I also believe massive respect to the ownership groups out there and the owners. It's also up to the owner to make sure that he provides the right amount of security to that general manager so that general manager or head coach, right? Head coaches that bring in former guys that may teeter. Bringing in Dan Quinn, not because Dan ever did anything duplicitous, but Dan Quinn is such a strong personality and the players love him. For Double M to bring him in Dallas, that took some huge cojones for sure. I think that the owners can do a really good service to their leadership group by allowing them to know that there is security there, no matter who's in the building with them.
Yeah, and even if you look at Minnesota, one of the teams that's having a lot of success this year. Adolfo-Mensah brought in Ryan Grigson, who had, you know, obviously his turn at the plate. There, you know, reports that they wanted to bring in Jim Harbaugh, who is, you know, his own strong sort of presence there. Like there's just a lot of value, obviously, in bringing in bright people. You know, people who have at one time held your job to help you in that way. So what a great discussion topic. We're gonna end our discussion topics on a somber note because obviously in Denver, a team we've talked about a number of times, Denver decided this week to fire Nathaniel Hackett. You know, I don't know, Thomas, what was your Christmas day like? Did you watch that game, the Rams Broncos? Are you enough of like, because I'm a big enough sicko, I was watching that game. And I don't know if you got to watch it that game. That was hard to watch if you had any feels for Denver, and I certainly felt bad for them. You know, it feels like with the Wilson contract the way it is. Also, our friend, there's a question that we got from the web, Sean Clement at Sean from CBAC, one of our very smartest, very best and brightest at Sumer, who hurt their reputation more in 2022, Russell Wilson or Elon Musk. I wanted to retweet that, but I did not want to get the Sumer account banned out of fear for that, so I did not. But you know, with Wilson being where he's at, ownership being new and where they're at, you know, it was kind of the natural thing for them to let Hackett go. But do you think he got a fair shake, and where do they go in the future here?
Leave it to Sean Clement to throw out a really interesting question with many layers there, Sean. Great job. I know you listen. I know you and Eric are talking all the time about how we build Sumer in to be the massive entity that we want it to be. So that's another aside. Do I think he got a fair shake? Categorically, Eric, I've always been anti first year firings at any level. I think it's, asinine, at least in my mind as a football guy, right? And yet this is a very, very interesting situation. And no way am I saying the owners and the Waltons and Mr. Penner, the president, is asinine. I'm just saying it doesn't make a ton of sense out the gate. This is a different situation with a new ownership group who, by the way, whatever we see their net worth being 80 billion plus, and Penner being the new president who doesn't have background in sports but is bringing in Condoleezza Rice. He has John Elway in the wings, of course, to always tap into, as well as Peyton Manning. There's a lot of firepower there that this group has. They have George. They've committed to George, which I love, at least at this point, because I really like George. This is a tough situation for George. So what I'm saying is, of course, it wasn't fair, but fairness does not factor in as much in a situation like this when an ownership group takes over in the middle of the season.
Yeah, and Peyton, I know people are reeling a little bit. For example, Mojal, another one of our loyal listeners, is George Payton on the hot seat. He was the one who approved the trade for us and hiring Hackett. Like, that's certainly the case. Now, I will say, like, dividing credit up is not easiest, but like Peyton was a part of the Minnesota Vikings team that drafted Stephon Diggs, who's probably a Hall of Famer, Harrison Smith, who might be a Hall of Famer, Danielle Hunter, who's pretty damn close. Everson, like the Peyton very clearly is good at the elements of the job that are going to have to get the Denver Broncos out of this nonsense, right? Out of this, because my issue is the hardest place to be in football, and I think you experience this a little bit at the end of your Falcons tenure, is when you have a quarterback who makes really good money, who is maybe and in the case of Wilson, I think I'm looking at the ceiling for Russ, because obviously he's played very poorly this year. But at his ceiling, Russ is probably a tier or two below the great players of the position, right? And for you with Matt, it was like Matt was that MVP caliber guy. By the time you got to 18 and 19, Matt was maybe a tier worse, right, just because of age and stuff. And it's just so hard to win in the league when you have a tier 2 or 3 quarterback making tier 1 money. So the only way out of that stuff, right, is to draft well. That's the only way, because you don't have the money, because you're paying the money to the quarterback, and that quarterback's not an elevator guy anymore, mm-hmm, right? We talk about Mahomes, we talk about Herbert, we talk about Allen, Burrow. Those guys, they're making all the money because they're great managers. They can build people up and take guys who aren't making as much and help them contribute to a winner. Russ needs people to help him become a winner again. And you can't buy those players on the open market with him making that much money. You got to draft them. And Peyton, at least in his time in Minnesota, has shown the proclivity to be able to do that. It's the only way out for them. And so I don't think it's beneficial for them to get rid of Peyton, given his track record, and start anew. I think they just have to hope that he does what he's good at, which is to acquire great players through the draft, because that's the only way that they can make it work with Wilson.
Peyton's reputation around the league as a longtime evaluator of talent is in the top tier for sure. Just so you know, this isn't BS and stroking everyone coming through on the management side. He is well known for that. And he worked with Rick and helped Rick, Spielman through a lot, as you have alluded to. I think that's really, really important. I think it's important, for everyone to understand that. I said this before, remember, everyone, as a GM in today's world, not 25 or 30 years ago, when you got 5 GMs and 5 head coaches, 5 quarterbacks and 5 head coaches, you get 2, maybe. And the only reason you don't get 2 of one or the other or both is because it's a massive F up. That's to be determined by the Penner Group, and the Walton Group and President Penner.
Yeah, and again, like I'm going to say this, respectfully, but like the odds are against him, right? Like, you think about your division rivals, the Saints, right? When they went 7-9 3 straight years with Breeze, that was kind of like, and Breeze was a tier 1 quarterback. I would say more like tier 1.5, but he was making tier 1 money. The way the Saints got out of being in 7-9 was the Michael Thomas draft, and then the one draft that got them Ramczyk, Marcus Williams, Lattimore, and Kamara all in one draft. Right, all those guys on cheap contracts, get them in the building, then they won immediately after that, right? And everything, all the sins were forgiven. That's the kind of, and in Minnesota, when they had, they had the draft with Eric Kendricks, Danielle Hunter, Stephon Diggs, Trey Waynes, all in the same draft. That was, again, the one that got that team in the NFC Championship game, and Peyton was a part of that. So to me, like, they need that kind of draft like this year for all to work. The hard part is they don't have a first round pick, But again, like this is why they pay guys like Peyton the big bucks, because they got it. That's their way out. It's a long shot, but that's the way out. And I don't know if it makes a ton of sense to move on from him, given that the person that comes in is under the same restrictions and has the same long shot play anyway. And so even though Peyton got them in this mess from people's perspective, again, he took a swing at a big time quarterback and it didn't work so far. I don't necessarily believe that taking that swing should prevent him from getting an opportunity to get him out of that hole, because the next guy you bring in is going to be no better at drafting the 5 guys they need in the next 2 years to get them out of it.
It's a good point. I want to raise my hand and say, I believe when the dust settles, George will be there, and he will be there having an opportunity to gather all the pieces, work with this new ownership group who are really dedicated, who have a ton of money and are able to look at this. And I think he's going to survive strongly and come out the other side, because now it's really, really important, to your point. And there's a lot on the table for it, of course.
If anybody from Denver's listening and wants help hiring the head coach, Thomas's number. Okay. The last part I want to talk about is some listener questions. We already had some good ones from Sean. We've had some solid ones. We had a really good one that I do want to talk about when we talk about quarterback play. This was a cool DM that I got from a Chiefs fan here, Chiefs fan and physician here. I love the Sumer pod. Questions, reason, concussion, and interceptions. Thinking about Tua throwing multiple interceptions. Does the play data, sack, hit, quarterback, run, support interception or potential interception in subsequent plays? We will talk about that when we talk about quarterback evaluation. Is one thing I do want to talk about is is play-to-play stuff noise, or do some quarterbacks respond to getting hit on previous plays better than others? So I don't want to, I DM them back. I said, great question. Follow the SumerSports account. Our DMs are open if you want to ask those. I do want to say thank you for that question. We will answer that when we get to the quarterback stuff. That is a reason, by the way. Love the Wednesday episode. It covers a ton of ground, is longer. The Monday episodes where we go deep diving into positions, that is where we will get to the nuts and bolts of specific stuff like that. I just wanted to throw that out there. We did get a question from MB3 at mbrunick123 on Twitter. And this one kind of caused a little bit of disagreement on our end, Thomas. The Dallas Cowboys have had a great draft in 2022 and seem to be one of the best teams when it comes to drafting players. Why do you think that is? And what are your thoughts on the process and decision-making over there? Thanks. So I think where this question is coming from, and I do want to share my screen a little bit because I do think that this year's draft did elicit, and let me make sure I have this up here. This one did elicit a solid look here. Let me make sure I can actually get to this page without much of a hiccup here, because the Dallas Cowboys draft this year has actually been pretty solid. It's been basically a few starters, a few really high-end contributors. Let me share here. Everybody can see there. So this is just on Pro Football References page here. And we have Tyler Smith, a tackle who has started a bunch of games. We have Sam Williams, a defensive end who has 3 sacks. We also have Jake Ferguson, a backup tight end who's caught a few balls. Deron Bland is the one that I was surprised at. Fresno State corner who has 5 interceptions. And they also have John Ridgway, a 5th-round pick, who has contributed 13 games or so to the cause. Last year, they had Michael Parsons, of course. The previous year, they had CeeDee Lamb and Trayvon Diggs, 2 Pro Bowlers. Prior to that, Connor McGovern's a starter. Tony Pollard should be a starter. Prior to that, Leighton Vander Esch, Michael Gallup, Dalton Schultz. Prior to that, though, Thomas, you have Taco Charlton. Chidobe Awuzie has been a good player, but not necessarily for them. I bristle at this idea that they are a great drafting team, Thomas. What do you think? I'm sort of more. I think that this year's draft has had a bumper crop of players, but I think historically they've done really well on the top end of the draft, and then after that they're just kind of like every other team.
Yeah, and I think, most people in the NFL look at how they set things up and how Jerry Jones approaches it, with Stephen Jones being, the main guy with Jerry, and then Will McClay, just remember that name. Will is a VP of player personnel. I believe that's his title there. He'll get a number of potential asks every year to join a team as a GM, but he has to be in the right place. Who wants to leave the Dallas Cowboys if there's an heir apparent situation there? That's a little aside. Me, I always like to mix in the management. I say that all the time. I think they have an adept group there. I think they have a good, person in the last 2 years, and with Dan there, and I know Dan's ability to evaluate defensive players. I mean, it's interesting, and I've talked to Dan a number of times about Micah Parsons, of course. And if we only had that type of a linebacker in Atlanta, can you imagine? We joked about that a little bit. I think, what they do, given how they approach this, they are solid, like you said, very good in those early picks, right? And there's other picks down the road that are really important as you build a team. And look, it's not an exact science, and I'm not taking one side or another. There's a lot to it. You just have to make sure you know how you're going to place your players, and it's important to know where your third, fourth, fifth, sixth rounds guys are landing. Hopefully you can land more than not. And when you look at the percentages, and the next time we come on, I would love you to bring the percentages truly of what the percentage of a first rounder making it to and or starting in the league to the percentage of a fifth, sixth, and seventh rounder. Because a lot of time teams like this, and believe me, I've been around other teams who have said, well, look, you can look at Eric Mangini when he was with the Jets, right? Trade away the barn to make sure that he could get the 1 and 2 together, right? And people would accuse me of that. I believe in the mid-round guys. You have to build with them. But when you truly look at some of the percentages there may be other ways to get creative so that you can get your pillar positions. And I feel like Dallas often wants to go after their pillar position guys.
Yeah, they did a good job in the Parsons draft of basically, waiting out a team like the Eagles who traded up for Devontae Smith. But ultimately they got Parsons, who's a terrific player. I think that, the hard part is, there's a couple things, like, for one, the research, and this was my colleague Timo Riske. I had done the research before him, but he I think did a more robust version of it. Basically, like, for the most part, no one overdrafts the picks that they're given, right? So over time, if you adjust for the expectation of each pick, most teams kind of just it's very within a certain band. So everybody has hits and misses. Tampa Bay for a few years there had these, had a big string of hits. A lot of that was them picking certain premium positions. So the research there is, fairly strong. And so when anybody says, hey, team X has done much better than you would expect, my general feeling is almost always, well, no, otherwise we would have found it. But at the same time, this year, you can see why this team has been pretty good. They've gotten draft picks up and down the roster, a la, that 2017 Saints team that I talk about all the time. But to me, I think and I bring this back to the Vikings, when you have the 2015 draft that gets you Trey Waynes and Stephon Diggs and all those guys, and that gives you the bumper crop. The 2016 draft where you go Laquan Treadwell, Willie Beavers, and none of those players hit. To me, it's just another example of, and this is what we're going to try to squeeze out of the orange at Sumer. It's about how to trade those picks in an effective way, and it's about squeezing out that edge that so far no one has been able to squeeze out in the draft through player evaluation. It's really tough. I think the Cowboys have some sharp elements to them. Obviously, Alok and Tom Robinson are terrific, and we have Adam Vonderhaar at Sumer now, and he's a very sharp guy that was part of the process there at Dallas. So I wouldn't say I would say they're certainly in the top half of the league in terms of process, but I think we're the question probably overreacted a little bit to this year's draft.
Good point. Love your analogy and your approach and your analysis of it, because again, it's easy to get caught up. And I do want to stress again, Jerry is very smart with how he approaches it and who he has around him. Ultimately, like any owner, I've said this before, it's their train set. And if he wants a certain player, he's taking a certain player. That's all there is to it. Even if it is a bust or a blunder, it doesn't matter to him. Well, it matters, of course, but I mean, it's his say. All the other scouting staff, part of the scouting staff, can roll their eyes on it. Ultimately, it's who's in charge. And in this situation, he's in charge.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is something, by the way, that I would say most, if you're looking at outside observers to the process, that's where most outside observers really do miss. It's the fact that there are these extraneous things. These are these constraints that general managers have to live within from ownership or from general, sort of situation, coach that, we often bristle at. But, it's not something that they have to live within those constraints. And so, that's something that, especially in Dallas, where the owner is so, so strong, right? That there's going to be a lot there as far as drafts and things like that. So, cool, man. Like, do we? That's basically all we have for questions. We really want to, just give out our appreciation for everybody asking those. Keep them coming. Like I said, just to reset here, if you like this episode, go, to your favorite podcast platform, subscribe, rate, review. We will read reviews on air as they come in. If you like watching this on YouTube, obviously subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're well over 400 followers now, which has been wonderful. We want to get that number up, though, over the next few months, especially as we get into the Super Bowl and Combine and draft season as well. Monday's episode, we will be discussing a position. We haven't picked it yet. I was thinking about the secondary, Thomas. I don't know if we want to flip a coin as to whether or not be corner or safety as we work our way through the defense. But we really do appreciate everybody stopping by and everybody that is taking in this podcast. It continues to grow greatly. And we hopefully, as the new year starts, we'll continue to give you guys the best and most unique content in the NFL and football space. So for Thomas Dimitroff, this has been Eric Eager. This has been episode 16 of the SumerSports Show.